All right, if everyone's ready to begin, we will do so. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, April 13th, 2023 meeting of the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. We are reconvening from closed session. May we have a report of closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The board met in closed session on March 20th and April 13th and adjourned with no reportable action taken. Thank you.
All right, fellow board members, if you will take a moment to look at actually, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. We didn't do that since we had a closed session. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, if you'll take a look at the minutes from the last meeting, I will entertain a motion to approve them.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Do we have a second?
A second.
Moved by Commissioner Gwynn, seconded by Commissioner Gonska. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing a unanimous vote, the minutes are passed. Moving on to item 7, public comment. I don't see any names tonight. Again, it's going to be a quicker evening than we thought. A last call for public comment. Oh yeah, no, we're not skipping item 6. All right, public comment is closed. We are going to go to special agenda items, announcements pertaining to the Rent Control Board by our esteemed Executive Director, Tracy Condon. Tracy.
Good evening, Commissioners. I have 3 announcements tonight. First, the Owning Rent-Controlled Properties seminar that I mentioned at the last meeting, we changed the date of that, so it's this coming Tuesday from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. It's a virtual meeting, and anybody who's interested in signing up can sign up on our website. I also wanted to mention on that same day in the morning, the City Attorney's Office is doing a fair housing symposium to celebrate the 55th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. The speakers at that symposium include Mayor Gleam Davis, Chancellor Al Mansour, the Executive Director of the Southern California Housing Rights Center, J.C. Gage, the Civil Rights Compliance Director for HUD, and Gary Rhodes of the City Attorney's Office. I'm sure it will be a very interesting gathering and symposium. It's going to be at the multi-purpose room at the main library from 9 a.m. till 12 p.m. And anybody interested in signing up can do so through the City Attorney's website.
Is sign up required?
Yes. Sign up is required. Although I did hear this afternoon that they have spaces available for anybody who's interested. And then I just wanted to mention that at the end of March, several of the board members and myself went to the Housing California conference that was held in San Diego this year. It's a housing conference that covers a lot of different topics related to housing and brings together individuals from a variety of different organizations. It's always very interesting, and I think the board members who went enjoyed it, so I'd like to invite you to make any comments if you'd like to about Housing California.
Who wants to go first? Commissioner Ivanov.
Yeah, so there were a couple sessions that I found very informative. One of the sessions that I went to, I think it was just me at that one, talked about the debt ceiling and what's going to happen if the federal government does not raise the debt ceiling. And I believe the deadline for the federal government to do that is August. And some of the consequences if we don't raise the debt ceiling is any federal assistance in terms of grants and funding for affordable housing for cities and municipalities across the state. It won't just be cut. I mean, it just will cease to flow completely. So I thought that was a very informative session because I think we're about 4 months away now from that happening. And, I don't know how much of this is in our jurisdiction, but to the extent that if there's anything that we can do looking at our budget in terms of preparing for that now, serving as a stopgap in any way for city funds, I think that would be prudent to do so. Because unfortunately, I think it is possible that could happen. I think a lot of people are not taking that seriously enough, so I think that is a possibility that could happen later this summer. Another panel that I went to, I think all of us went to this one actually, there was a panel of 5 individuals that previously experienced homelessness themselves. And I thought that was a very interesting panel because they talked about the need for, oftentimes a lot of policymakers draft policy without taking into consideration the very people that will be affected by that policy. So they brought attention to that. And I think it's important too that one of the panelists said, it's important that those people aren't just treated like tokens. So we can't just say, these, 5 people spoke at a conference, they shared their story, we can all feel good about ourselves now and be done, right? They need to be part of the policymaking process in a substantive way from start to finish. So I think that's just something for, us as policymakers. Doesn't just have to affect housing issues. I think that's just something that we should consider when we draft policy, so.
Fantastic. Who else? Anybody else want to make any comment? Commissioner Leslie.
I just want to add to what you said. There was also a challenge that was issued when they spoke, and the challenge was to go out and have a conversation with someone that was unhoused, because they are human beings, and this is what I share everywhere I go. They belong to someone. That's somebody's son, daughter, mother, brother, somebody's relatives. They're not just, somebody that they just get passed by so many people on a day-to-day basis. They've lost their identity. I also went to some of the different panels and stuff. I really couldn't decide on one. And just diversity in affordable housing. I was very surprised to see how much diversity there was at the Housing California Conference, as well as just to learn the different tracks that there were as far as with policy and, affordability and all the policies that need to be taken care of prior to just building affordable housing and all the stumbling blocks that took place prior to that a lot of people don't know about. So I learned a lot.
Wonderful. Anyone else? Okay, Commissioner.
I think, like Commissioner Leslie and Commissioner Ivanov, the homelessness situation was a huge concentration in this Housing California conference. And so I think we were all impacted by going to those things. One of the ones that I attended, I think it was the only one that went to, was the healthcare industry and what they're trying to do to aid in the homeless situation. And this particular panel was hosted by Kaiser Permanente. They're going with 3 other large healthcare providers in the state of California, and they're undergoing a pilot project where they're trying to track the homeless. And as you can imagine, sometimes when they're in an emergency situation, they're going to whatever hospitals nearby. And so they may be starting from scratch when they're going to that hospital. That hospital has no idea what this prior homeless person or this homeless person has gone through in other hospital situations, or even in their home situations. Maybe they have a home or an assisted facility, and they're trying to put together this so that when they go into a hospital, they can go into a database and they can see where this homeless person is in their care at that point, and they're not getting repeat care, or they're not starting from scratch. But you can imagine the hoops that these healthcare people are jumping through because of confidentiality and all this type of thing. And they actually showed us, this is Sacramento, the group from Sacramento, one of the pilot projects is at, was there to say what their next steps are after 2 years in the pilot. And they actually showed us the first page of, finally, an agreement to share data. And it may have been signed right now. I'm not sure. They were hoping to within the next few weeks. But that was going to be a huge start. It was these four huge, Kaiser, UC Irvine Healthcare System, and a couple other very large ones that I can't remember off the top of my head, but also the city of Sacramento and the county of Sacramento. And eventually they want to bring in other entities such as housing things so that they can track these people. And I thought that's a huge thing for the homeless population, to be able to get that care and not only for them, but for the healthcare industry itself to be able to give better care to them. So that was the one that stood out to me more than any. But I will say also that the plenary that we attended that had the homeless advocates there, one thing that they did bring up was housing first. You know, they brought up housing first, and everybody says, well, what can we do to help these people? Is it housing? Is this? But those 5 advocates all said, housing first, if that's what you need to provide for us to get off the streets and to do this type of thing. And finally, I just wanted to say that the one thing that I brought away from this is that all of us see the homeless situation now out in the streets. And we see it and we say, it's getting worse. It's getting worse. Why are we throwing all this money at this and then nothing's happening? It's just getting worse. Well, as several people said in several of these sessions I attended, said, think if we didn't do that, how bad the situation would be. So we got to come at it from that angle as well. We can't just give up because it looks like it's getting worse. It is probably getting worse, but think about it would be if we didn't do this. So it was a wonderful thing to attend. I'm glad I did go to it, and I wish you would have been there.
Thank you. I had the privilege of attending with Carolyn Terosis and one time Steve Duran, but Carolyn and I went, I think, 3 years. And Steve with me once. So had a lot of opportunity to do exactly what you guys did. Kurt, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what was said here. I think you all did a very good job of summarizing some of the things that were talked about. Just to summarize sort of one of my big takeaways that I thought about a number of times hearing people, both panelists, but also people attending, talk about, there was that just how lucky we are in Santa Monica to have the strong tenant protections and rent control protections that we do have here. And I think that's always important to keep in perspective and to remind ourselves, because it's not perfect. There are more things to fight for, to improve, to tweak, but to keep in mind where we've come from over, since the 70s when rent control was first passed here, because there are people all around the state, especially in the Central Valley right now, that are really fighting hard for people who have virtually no protections whatsoever. So as much as we can be an example to them, to be resources to them, to give them advice, I think would be helpful. And again, just to be thankful for what we do have here.
Great summaries by all of you. Tracy was at the end of your report. I will say that we're also very lucky to have the staff that we do, because being the first rent control jurisdiction in the state and bearing the burden of a lot of lawsuits and things that tested that law, lets Tracy, Allison, Haka, Dan, and others go out to other communities, be part of meetings that take place with other jurisdictions, showing them best practices, advising cities that are coming online as to what they could do. Is part of our staff's mission and our charter's mission. So, bravo. And on with the show. Moving on to item 10, that's jurisdictional items. Our first item tonight is item 10A, an exemption application for owner occupancy, 10A1. If we could please have a brief staff report.
Commissioners, this is an application by Marie and Anuj Saigal. They bought their property back in March of last year. Each has a 50% ownership interest. There are only 2 units on the property. And so the question before you is whether they submitted sufficient evidence to show that they've lived on the property at least 120 days before they submitted their application as their principal residence. They do own another property, an investment property out in Yorba Linda, but they submitted a lease to show that it's rented. They submitted utility, financial, government records to show that they use their property as their mailing address for those institutions. And because there were no tenants on the property, we sent the hearing investigator to the property, and her report is consistent with their claimed occupancy. And for those reasons, staff recommends that you accept and approve the exemption application.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers on this item?
No, there have been no requests to speak.
All right, we'll enter discussion. Unless nobody has any, I'll entertain a motion.
I make the motion that we pass this.
So the language we need to use for the motion, just for your edification, is that we need to grant the application and adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Thank you.
Is there a second for that?
A second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Will you please call the roll?
Yes, Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Moving on to item 10A1, or 10A2. May we have a brief staff report to this owner occupancy exemption
Chair
application?
Foster, unless there's any discussion that needs on this, it's almost identical to the previous one, and I don't see any issue with this one. I'd so move that we go ahead and grant the application and adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law in this item.
No problem with that. Is there a second?
I second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second to accept and grant this application. Will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes, motion passes. And that owner and I agree with you. I think once in a while it's best to hear the cases out, but also when there's no tenant present, it presents less of an issue for me to do so than when there are tenants in residence. I do prefer to hear more about those cases, but yeah, that's something we have done many times in the past. All right, moving on. We do have an appeal tonight. Item 10B, a decreased petition at 2009 19th Street, Unit 5, C. Giro owner. May we have a staff report, please?
Commissioners, Manuel L. Gonzalez is the tenant of Unit 5 on this property, and he filed a rent decrease petition alleging a defective heating system and also mold in his apartment. The hearing officer granted decreases for both of those items, and the landlord has appealed the decision. The landlord argues in his appeal that he has already repaired the heating system and that he submitted evidence to show that there is no mold problem in the apartment. The board reviews this matter as an appellate body, therefore it should affirm the decision if it is supported by substantial evidence in the record. Mr. Gonzalez testified that the heater doesn't work in his unit, and also that the vent into the bedroom does not work. He also testified that the pilot light doesn't stay lit. The hearing investigator, Ms. Wodnicki, inspected the property, and she confirmed that the heater didn't work while she was there. The pilot light was not on, so that report is consistent with the claim. Mr. Giro, he testified that he had replaced the pilot light mechanism just 6 weeks prior, and that the heater works fine. And if the pilot light was off, it only needs to be relit. He also said that the apartment is big enough for the heater to heat the entire apartment, notwithstanding whatever is the issue with the vent. Given that record, the hearing officer decided that although the landlord may have replaced the pilot light mechanism before, the problem persists, and therefore there is sufficient basis to grant a rent decrease for that condition. For the mold, Mr. Gonzalez testified that ever since he moved in, he's had a problem with mold in the apartment. He said he's seen mold marks in both the kitchen and the bathroom. And he said that he's tried to wash the walls with bleach. He's painted the unit several times, but the problem persists. He also testified that after the winter rains, water pools in front of the driveway because of improper drainage in the walkway leading up to, the front door, because of improper drainage in the walkway, and that the water seeps into his unit. He presented several witnesses, 2 former roommates and his daughter, who all corroborated his testimony about the condition of the apartment with regards to the mold. Mr. Gonzalez also hired a mold testing company, and they submitted their test results. But he also subpoenaed someone from the mold testing company, one of their expert analysts, to testify at the hearing. And that's Mr. Bancroft. And Mr. Bancroft testified that what the results of the test show is that there is an elevated level of spores inside of the apartment, and in fact, it's higher than the spore count outside of the apartment. And he specifically pointed out one particular type of spore, Cladosporum, which he said shouldn't exist indoors at all. On cross-examination, the landlord suggested that this issue may be caused by the water dispenser that the tenant has in the unit because of condensation, and Mr. Bancroft said condensation couldn't produce these results. He also said that while there may not be a national standard for what is considered the threshold level for harmful spore counts because of various environments, it should never be a higher spore count inside the unit than outside. And he also, Mr. Bancroft testified that he did see a problem with the sloping in the walkway that is consistent with the testimony about the water pooling after rains. Mr. Giroux testified that he had hired a repair person who he said had substantial experience in dealing with mold, and that person hadn't seen any problem with the mold, and he checked with by the water. He didn't see any watermarks by the front door, but since that evidence was hearsay evidence, the hearing officer accorded it less weight. And Mr. Giroux also mentioned that he also had hired his own mold testing company, and the results of the mold testing company showed that it was a lower spore count, but no one appeared from the mold testing company to testify at the hearing and be subject to cross-examination on the results that they had obtained. And so the hearing officer accorded that less weight as hearsay evidence. Given that record, there is substantial evidence in the record that supports the decreases granted by the hearing officer for both of those conditions, and for that reason, staff recommends that the board affirm the decision.
Thank you for that report. Do we have any questions for staff about that report? And I'm a bit shocked to see, I think maybe this is the first time in 7 years that I have not seen a speaker on an appeal, either the tenant or the landlord present. And you've had no request to speak?
That's correct. No requests.
All right, just giving everyone a fair chance in case they were running late or anything else. We will enter discussion on this item. Commissioner Gwynn, I did see your name in. Was that from before?
He answered the question I was going to ask about hearsay.
How efficient of you to take that in. I just want to say, you shock me how incredibly you can recite the details and nuance in order of every single case, every month, every year that I've served with you without reading from any notes. It's unbelievable. You should have been on Matlock or something. I don't know. Is there any other comment? Oh, I see it now. Danny Ivanov, you are up.
I just wanted to make a note. I took issue with one thing that Mr. Giroux mentioned in his appeal. He wrote, and I quote,
"Can you give us a page number to refer
yes,
to?"
This is very first page of his appeal. He wrote, and I quote, with reference to the wall furnace, it is my position that any time he claims it is not working, I'm always ready and willing cheerfully to examine it and get it working, end quote. I just wanted to make a point for the record that tenants should be able to have the peace of mind that they should not have to contact their landlord daily, weekly, or even monthly, frankly, to get something fixed or get something repaired. So I just wanted to
Or just have something function.
correct. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
I appreciate that. Seeing no other comment at this time, I'm going to add something. I'm completely satisfied with our hearing examiner's findings and our investigator's findings during the hearing. And even though we're hearing this as an appellate body, and it does not matter if we would have reached any different conclusions based on the facts entered into the record, I still want to go on record as saying that if a landlord or a property manager spent as much time actually making the repair as they did fighting the repair with dozens of photos and attempts to debunk the claims of the tenant for something that's as clear as, does a heater work or does it not work? We would have less contention and less need for the use of our hearing services. But that being said, our petition processes are here for both our landlords and our tenants, and we are happy to make a ruling in this case. I don't see any other items for discussion. Can someone please make a motion?
I would motion that we affirm the decision and
Finding of fact.
the finding of facts.
And
To
conclusions.
deny, to deny the appeal.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes, motion passes. I was just reading this out loud. I'm sorry. All right. Moving on to administrative items. We have item 12A, a proposed amendment to Regulation 9002D and F to conform to Measure RC. May we have a staff report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this item is before you to amend Regulations 9002 F, D, and F. After the voters passed Measure RC in November, that made some changes to the charter regarding owner occupancy. It required the owners to move in within 60 days as opposed to 30 days. And it also required that they intend to live in the unit for 2 years unless there are extenuating circumstances. And so before you are the amendments to those regulations that would conform to the charter amendments.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Do we have any questions for staff on this item? All right, seeing none, do we have discussion? All right, seeing none, it's clear to me that this is a cleanup measure and that the language looks completely adequate to accomplish enacting Measure RC and cleaning it up in our regs. So I would entertain a motion to amend Regulation 9002 as indicated on Attachment A.
I so move that we amend.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. If you could please call the roll.
Yes, Commissioner Gwynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Ivanov,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonska,
Yes.
Vice Chair Leslie,
Yes.
Chair Foster.
Yes. Motion passes. We will amend the charter. Thank you. All right. Folks, it's time. Everyone watching at home and here in the hall, brace yourselves for the most requested, the most sought after, the most clicked on report in the history of the City of Santa Monica website. It is the 2022 Rent Control Board Annual Report. I would like to invite the information staff to the podium to give this hot report.
Thanks for that intro. I don't think I could introduce it any more than you did. I really think this is a very highly anticipated report every year, and it really provides some, serious insight into not only the operations of the agency, but what's really going on with the rents. And this year, the report is going to be presented by one of our information coordinators, Rose Patel. Rose has been with us for about 5 years, I think. She joined us from Public Works, and she, in addition to being one of the key information staff, she was our Department Operations Center representative during COVID, and really provide us, a lot of important information about what we needed to do as an agency, and kept us, informed and made sure that we had the supplies and all that. So it was a very important role on top of her regular work. But Rose helped produce the report this year, doing a lot of the analysis, and so it's only appropriate that she be the one to present it this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Board commissioners, our director, Tracy, managers, thank you for having me tonight. It's a pleasure for me to present the well sought after annual report, Santa Monica Rent Control Board 2022 annual report. I'll be happy to take any questions at any time during the presentation. So as we all know, 2022 was an eventful year. So let's start with new development. As we can all recall, the sharp increase in inflation in 2022 resulted in the highest general adjustment to controlled units in 30 years. Since the GA is tied to the inflation rate, for the first time, the GA reached the maximum of 6% under the rent control law. As a result of this, the following were implemented. With tenants confronted with the steep increase in rent in September, the city's Department of Community Services quickly developed the RCAR, the Rent Control Adjustment Relief, to assist with temporary rental assistance to low-income households struggling to make ends meet. The program provided $750,000 in funding and assisted 505 households with an average relief of $660. Please note that 505 is the correct number. I think in the introduction section of the report, there was another number which was not updated with the newest information, but we will be right on that and make the correction. Also to keep in mind that this number may change as there's another handful of pending applications that are not fully processed yet. With the high GA and to prevent displacement, the Rent Control Board recommended that City Council place a measure on the November ballot to reduce the 2022 general adjustment mid-year and to achieve an overall increase of 3% for the year, and also to set limits for GAs going forward. That was Measure RC, and it passed, and it went into effect in December. Measure RC also modified the rules regarding eviction for owner occupancy, we just talked about that, and made sensible reforms to elections of Rent Control Board commissioners. Measure EM emerged from concerns that the high GA could occur in times when communities are experiencing hardship. This measure authorized the city charter to be amended to allow the Rent Control Board to disallow or modify annual general adjustment during times when a state of emergency is declared by the president, the governor, the Los Angeles County Health Department, or City Council, or the Director of Emergency Services. Finally, our long-awaited new information system was launched in early 2022. Years of planning and development efforts of staff culminated into the introduction of this new information system in January. The system has a public-facing portal that allows customers to file their own forms. The public-facing portal is called Civics, and at this time there are about 890 accounts covering about 1,800 site addresses, which is close to about half of the properties. Users submitted over 1,200 forms using Civics. And those forms are tenancy registration forms, we have ownership registration forms, change of mailing address. They can do agent authorization forms and some fee waivers as well. Next slide. So in pursuit of the values of accountability, equity, and inclusion, we took several actions in 2022, including educating staff through racial equity and implicit bias training, and learning to recognize and respond to microaggressions. We also began a process of reflecting on how effectively we are serving the community to ensure that all community members, no matter where they live, are made aware of the services we provide and the services available to them. The trainings were coordinated by the city's Racial Equity Committee, which is comprised of staff from each city department who serve as equity and inclusion officers. Jaleesa Bowles, one of our hearing officers, is our EIO. Working with Ms. Bowles, we decided to study whether tenants across all city neighborhoods are using board services equally, either through contacting us for information or seeking administrative remedies. Beginning in September 2022, staff began recording the addresses of a representative sample of tenants they assisted. Those tenants' addresses are identified as points on the map. It's not very visible, but there's red ones on there as well, and those indicate tenants who were assisted in Spanish. Next. No, actually, go back to the slide. Thank you. As you can see, there's a widespread distribution of contacts from all parts of the city, and we compared the percentage of contacts by city area to the percentage of units in each area. We see that there's a close correlation as shown in the table. Most contacts are within a few points of the percentage of units in each area. The table shows tenants in city area B and G were slightly more likely to contact us, and tenants in city area A were slightly less likely. We also began reviewing the number of tenants who use an administrative remedy, such as a decreased petition or an excess rent complaint, relative to city area. As you can see on the pie chart, although tenants in city area F were slightly less likely to contact us, they were far more likely to use administrative remedies. They represent 16% of the control units, yet they represent 24% of petitions filed. Tenants in city area A, C, and D were all slightly less likely to contact us and less likely to seek an administrative remedy. We are continuing to gather and analyze this data in 2023, and staff are looking critically at what we can do to identify and reduce barriers that may prevent some community members from using our administrative remedies. We're ready for the next
Rose,
slide
let's
now.
pause right there for just 1 second. Could you go back to that slide, please? First of all, fantastic, you're doing great. You're doing awesome. It's only like 1 million people watching you right now, so don't worry about it. Tracy had advised us that the agency was participating in this project that the city was requesting people to do, and it's really a fantastic use of the pursuit of equitable services. This is a fantastic way, a great lens to look at that I don't think a lot of people think to use, to see who's tapping our services. And I do find it fascinating that certain neighborhoods aren't, for whatever reason, what is our next step then to find out why those 3 neighborhoods, for example, are not utilizing the petition services? Do we think there's a language barrier, an intimidation factor? Like, what is the next step in the project to ascertain the cause?
So we want to continue gathering the data and see if these results remain stable. What we're thinking is it's probably important to go to where people are. That would be one thing. Go out to the communities, either at neighborhood meetings or other places so that we can meet people where they are and let them know about our services. That will be one thing. We also are thinking about coordinating additionally with other city departments. Right now, if code enforcement goes out and issues a citation that requires a temporary relocation, they will provide information about relocation benefits, but we're thinking we could also develop an information sheet that would explain in that situation what they might want to do with respect to our processes, like file a decrease petition. So we're going to think about a variety of things as we gather more information.
Fantastic. Secondly, why weren't we invited to the implicit bias training? I've talked with some of my other fellow elected officials, and it's really funny because we are asked to do security training. We are asked to do sexual harassment training, but all of our staff get to do these other kinds of amazing trainings. It was not required or offered to us. And I have never had the opportunity to experience implicit bias training, and I, for one, would be interested in being included in that at the next available opportunity.
So the trainings that you mentioned are all online trainings so that everybody just does them within the time frame that's required. This was, we did it virtually, but it was in-person training. If the board is interested in doing that, we could check with the city's trainers and see if we could arrange it. Of course, it would be a public meeting if you were all going to participate, but we can look into that, sure, certainly.
Much appreciated. And back to Rose.
Thank you. So slide 4. To better understand the rental housing market in Santa Monica, we categorize units by size: 0 bedrooms, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3+ bedrooms. As figure 2 shows, almost half of all control units are 1 bedroom. The next largest segment, more than a third, is 2 bedrooms. Together, 1 and 2 bedroom comprises 83% of the stock of control housing. This is to get some perspective to the median rents and to focus on unit sizes that represent the bulk of the control units. We also track trends by 7 city areas, as shown on the map adjacent, that roughly follow the city, neighborhood, and census tract. We will also show rent level by city areas, so keep in mind that Area G has twice as many units as Area D, for instance. Next slide, please. Annual changes in the number of control units varies little from year to year and are mostly due to changes in exemption status of properties or Ellis activity. During 23 years of vacancy decontrol, slightly more than 73% of control units rented at market rate at least once. As shown in the pie chart, only about 22% of control housing remains occupied by renters who moved in their units before 1999. These are called long-term units. In 2022, 333 were rented at market for the first time, and 256 formerly long-term units were either rented at market rate for the first time, withdrawn from the market under Ellis, or became exempt. Next slide, please. In 2022, there were 2,139 new tenancies registered, which is the lowest that we have registered in the last 10 years. We still may get some late registrations in 2023, but compared to last year, the number is much lower, as you can see from the trends chart, figure 11. While there were fewer rental registered in 2022, the initial median rent across all unit sizes were the highest recorded since Costa-Hawkins began, except for 3-bedroom units, which was the second highest, as you can see in figure 9. The decrease in initial median rents in the past 2 years during the pandemic has reversed. Increase were from 8.7% to 15.4% as documented in figure 10. Next slide, please. Figure 15 compares the current median MARs of all control market rate units with the rent of long-term units and shows the difference. The difference between market rate and long-term rents is 150% higher for one-bedroom units and larger. Figure 20 shows the income needed today to afford units in Santa Monica. For the first time, incomes needed to afford any size unit in Santa Monica is in the six figures. Prior to vacancy decontrol, about 84% of units were affordable to low-income households. That number is only around 4% today, mostly because there are units on properties that are required by agreement with governmental agencies to provide low-income housing. Also note, the three-bedroom median MAR is 4,372 and was listed mistakenly at 3,950 in the report. That too will be corrected. Next slide, please. For those who don't know, the Ellis Act is a state law that gives property owners in rent-controlled jurisdictions the right to exit the rental housing market by evicting tenants and withdrawing their units from the rental housing market. Figure 23 shows the net result of Ellis activity since the law's enactment in 1986. Although 684 properties were previously withdrawn, about 30% have since returned to the market under rent control. An additional 15 properties were redeveloped with units rented within 5 years of withdrawal and thus reverted to rent control. Overall, since 1986, there has been a net loss before redevelopment of 2,325 units on 501 properties to the Ellis Act. When we account for the redeveloped properties, the net loss to Ellis activity was 2,067 units and on 486 properties. In 2022, 3 more units were returned to the rental market than were withdrawn. The same thing happened last year, but only happened 4 more years before that. For all of 2022, tenants were still protected from eviction under various moratoria and emergency orders, and this is reflected in the relatively low Ellis activity for the year. Overall, 11 properties, 29 units, completed their withdrawal in 2022. 3 of these were previously owner-occupied properties, exempt, and owners decided to Ellis to qualify for planned demolition. Next slide, please. Figure 25 shows the percentage of withdrawn units by city area. Overall, withdrawal activity area E and G are the highest. After accounting for units returned and comparing to the number of units by city area, we can notice that the greatest percentage of control units that have been withdrawn are in area C and E. Many of the units withdrawn in area C consisted primarily of units withdrawn in the earliest years of Ellis activity. Over a third of units in area C have been withdrawn. The lowest percentage of units withdrawn has been in area B and D, 4.6% and 4.1% respectively. Next, please. Figure 31 is the summary of post-Ellis use of withdrawn properties as of December 31st, 2022. Slightly more than 50% of post-Ellis use remain for housing purposes. Apartment, mixed use, apartments, condominium, mixed use, and single-family dwelling. Next, please.
Rose, could I just
Sure.
ask a question? Obviously, because of the stoppage of Ellis Act in the last couple of years, they went away essentially for this period of time. Do you get the feeling right now that 2023 is going to be a dramatic change in that, or have you got any feeling at all that Ellis is going to become a big deal again this year.
I think as far as we can tell right now, it's the same trend as for the last 2 years, but since the emergency orders ended and the 60 days past that, they would be able to start Ellising and evicting tenants again. It may pick up, but that remains to be seen. So far, we don't have any indication that there's more, NOIs being filed to indicate such.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Good to go?
Oh, yeah, we're ready.
The Public Information Department is often the face of the agency. In 2022, public information staff engaged in approximately 9,200 telephone contacts. There was an increase of 17% from the prior year. They responded to 3,099 emails, which represented 18% increase from 2021. Demand for in-person service has remained low since the pandemic and was just 29% of pre-pandemic total. Total website page views increased by 25% from the prior year, with over 154,000 page hits registered. Reasons for this may include initially not knowing where to find information on the new website, higher activity on the look up a rent feature, which likely saw an increase due to the GA and the AGA. September and February, look up a rent accounted for more than a third of all page views. Public information staff are also tasked with monitoring evictions and exemptions, tracking changes in ownerships and tenancies, and reviewing plan checks and demolition permits to ensure that they are not violating the rent control law. Plan checks increased 28% in 2021. Next, please.
To what do we attribute that sharp increase?
Well, there have been a lot of ADUs being built, conversion of garages and other structures. That could be one of the reasons. Anything else that you could think of, Dan? There might be also the deadline of they had to get the project submitted by the end of the year.
Okay.
Dan.
Thank you.
Can I comment on that, if you don't mind? So this is an area that takes a lot of time in our office to review the plan check applications and the permits. And because there's been a large increase, we have met with the Building and Safety Department and Planning and asked them to send us those applications that apply to rent-controlled properties or single-family homes, and to no longer send us some of the things that have no relevance for us, like commercial property, tenant improvements, and things like that. So I think there is just more activity within the city, but it's not all about controlled properties. So we're trying to limit what comes to us. So, but it's an important piece of what we do. Thanks.
The Hearings Department adjudicates administrative proceeding brought under the Rent Control Charter Amendment and accompanying regulations. Petitions and complaints may be filed by tenants and landlords, and the agency itself may refer certain matters for hearing. New decreased petitions filed increased from 61 to 78 in 2022. 50 of these petitions were filed by market rate tenants, which represents a slightly lower share of market rate units overall. During 2022, 43 hearing officer decisions were issued, 16 appeals were filed, 10 of which were heard by the board. 100% of appeals heard by the board upheld hearing officer decisions. The annual report also includes summaries of the legal department's litigation activities and statistics on a variety of staff report and department prepared for the board. We have come to the end of the presentation. This report will be posted tomorrow on the website in the reports section. Do you have any other questions for me?
I was waiting for your name to appear in the queue, but we'll just,
First of all, obviously, having worked with you, Rose, in the past, I know how much work goes involved in this. Obviously, a lot of people in the department work on this, especially the public information people, but also the database people, and Tracy and Lima and everybody there. So I know, however, the onus of the work falls on you. And once again, Dan, you've trained your staff well, and they've done a fantastic job in putting together a great report. I did have just one question, comment about public information and the way that you handled things. Now, it seems like, obviously, because of the pandemic, things have changed in the way you interact with the public in a way, because when I was there, it was mostly over the counter. That's the way it was. I mean, there was a lot of phone calls, but there was a lot of over the counter. And it seems to me that that's really changed a lot. So am I correct in that, obviously, that?
It's, I think, a little combination of both the pandemic that kept people away in the first part of starting 2020, and then with civics, now people don't really have to come in to file any kind of forms. It's all being done online, so that reduces the foot traffic as well.
And also, just a comment about the website. I know it was an adjustment period, obviously, for people to learn not only interacting with our civics and with the portal, but just the website period, because ours was a totally different beast than prior to the new website coming up. And I assume, and I think, Dan, you're probably the one that does the majority of that, working with the city and the website, that there's still some transition period that has to be done with our website. And I think of particularly the board, but the board's landing site, because it's totally different than what the city council and that is.
Yes, that's right. So there are, like, the boards and commissions template hasn't really been developed yet. And they have to convert all of the, like, the recordings to a certain format that can be used in the new system. So that work is ongoing, and we expect that there's going to be some new developments there pretty soon. The structure of the web pages is very rigid, and we're doing what we can to try to conform to that. There are some other things that we would like to have done right now because of some personnel changes in the communications department. They're not doing some website development right now, but we certainly have heard from people who have expressed frustration of trying to find the information, so, I'd like to find ways so it's a little bit more intuitive, how to find information, maybe cross-link things more. We recently were able to revise our information by subject page, which used to be a PDF that had to go through an accessibility checker every time we made any little change. But now that's an HTML page, and so we can do a lot more with that now. Yes, we do see a lot of hits on the website. As Ms. Patel explained, we've had a 25% increase in website hits. So we're continuing to monitor that. It's a great resource. People really relied on that to find information. And the old structure was probably more intuitive, but we're doing the best we can with what we have.
All right, thanks.
I have a couple questions for both of you. So, having heard this multiple times over the years, it's still fantastic job, Rose. That you did really great. It was succinct. You kept us engaged. It was really great. So much of our budget is spent on our people, our staff. And that means we're a service-driven organization. And while I love, and I'm sure the public loves, the meat and potatoes, which is like, how many one-bedrooms? What does it cost? How many LS withdrawals? There's a page in the appendix that I feel like you used to highlight every year. And I think the public deserves to hear that information about public outreach and the contact. How many calls in a given period of time does our agency take in, and who are those calls from? I've always found that information very compelling. Can you just briefly, even though there's no slide for it, can you give a little bit of that information to the public?
Sure. I mean, this year it was curious, but we ended up with an exactly even 13,000 public contacts. So each time that somebody calls, we record that. We record whether or not it was an owner or a tenant calling us. As Ms. Patel explained, we are now recording the tenant addresses so that we can do, some metrics on that. But we continue to serve pretty much equally owners and tenants. It's usually, like 54-46 sort of split. Even though there are many, many more tenants, but, owners call us as well because they need to know how to comply with the law, where to find the forms that they need to file. So it is a major part of what we do. And the fact that staff has time to process 3,200 tenancy registration forms or do all of the other work that they do, all of the plan checks, speaking for public information anyway, it's pretty amazing because if you sat in our office, you would just hear the phone ring over and over and over again. And we welcome the calls, and it's a very satisfying part of the job, I think, for people because you know that you're really helping somebody. It's not, just the paperwork, which we have to do as a bureaucracy. But yeah, we're
busy.
As you said, yeah, we're busy, and we are the public face of the agency, so we get a lot. Before things come to hearings, usually come to us, and we have to, try to get things ready so that the petitions are ready to go when they do hit the hearings department, and all of that's a lot of work. And each contact, 13,000 contacts, represents a lot of work, a lot of emotions, a lot of everything. It's just. It's really commendable what everybody does all year.
That's right. It sure is. Following up on something Lonnie asked, the public desk. So pre-pandemic and pre-glass doors, there used to be just a spate of people there all day, every day. There were people on the bench waiting. There were people in each of the little intake chairs between the partitions. Every single time I've ever set foot in the office. How have the glass doors and the security measures affected, do you think, the public's ability to walk into your department, to walk up to the reception desk and get that kind of help started?
I don't think it has affected foot traffic, if we want to call it that way, because they first have to walk into City Hall, anybody that's coming in. So the glass doors is not really a barrier. We go get them at the glass door. It's just the overall number of people coming in has reduced because of the pandemic, first of all, and then I guess all of the other things they used to come in to take care of, business like forms and petitions and all that they can do online now. It makes it easier. So the reduction in counter services has seen, these numbers. But I don't believe that the glass doors really causes any issue. It is good for security because over the pandemic, there were some security issues, if you want to say, so helps everybody.
Okay. And my last question is, I think something worth highlighting that I always enjoyed hearing about in past years was the diversion of cases that we only ever see the appeals when it comes to the hearings department. And I love seeing highlighted how many things you resolve in mediation versus how many have to go to a full hearing. And that speaks volumes to the utility and the value of this agency to the tenants and landlords who pay for the registration fee for us to exist. Because I will remind the public once again, there are no tax dollars at play in this proceeding, in this agency. So can you talk just a little bit more about like how many cases were mediated and settled versus how many went to a full hearing? And how many units were served in that?
So this slide's actually what you're looking for, I believe. So we have all three types of petitions, the decrease, the construction decreases, and the excess rent. And the percentages there shows you how many of those were actually resolved in mediation and never even saw hearing.
Right, that's the percentages. I'm talking about the number.
Number?
The number. Do you have that handy, or do you want to come back with it in a little bit?
We might have to check in with the hearings department on specific
Sure.
numbers and get back to you on that.
No problem.
But I think if you do look in the hearings section, there are a number of tables.
Do you have a
and
page
kind of-
number?
Yeah, sure. For example, with our decrease petitions, which is the
48.
most common type, it's page 48. And I think the first statistic there is kind of interesting. For the decrease petitions filed in 2022, only one was referred to hearing directly or prior to mediation. So, we pretty much universally push people toward trying to work out as much as they can in mediation. If the parties are just not willing, then of course it's not going to work. But, the fact that 77 petitions were referred to mediation is pretty indicative of the effort that we're making there. I could go through it all, but it's very detailed here
highlighting
about how
them.
many, were partially resolved and moved on, and how many fully resolved. And
I just find it incredibly impressive that we are able to resolve so many issues between landlords and tenants where they don't have to go and hire attorneys, for a scant $9 a month. All parties get access to these excellent mediation services. And I just think those statistics are such a huge return on the community's investment in this agency. So thank you so much. I don't have anything else. Does anybody else have any questions? Please.
with the experts.
So, yeah, I was going to follow up. But, previously, we had a separate mediation section in the hearings department, but this year we put the mediation information in each hearing, in each petition type. So all of those hard numbers are in there, just with each petition type. And yeah, over the years, our mediation program has been wildly successful, and we get, I wish we could do more. We often get requests pre-petition, especially with construction issues and things like that, that we're happy to work with people on when we can. And so there's even things on in the report that aren't, there's more we do that's not even reflected in the report, so.
Of course. Yes, and thank you. Our hearings department, our public information department, our legal department, the administration, we are all spoiled rotten. We know that. Some of these folks will get to know that very quickly. I can't think of another government agency that functions so efficiently or gives such, like I said, a high return for the public's investment in us. So thank you so much for a wonderful, as always, report. People will be clicking. I want to know how many people click on that. Next year, please add a statistic that shows how many people click on the Santa Monica Rent Control Board's annual report.
All right, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just also want to thank Rose for putting together the report and the presentation. Of course, Dan worked very closely with her, but it reflects the work of the whole agency, and everybody contributes to getting the information to Rose and Dan. So it's an effort by the whole agency, but they've put it together and done another great job. So I want to thank them.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on. We just have two quick items left.
Don't we have to advise you to send this on to the...
That's a good point. Very good. Thank you for catching that, Commissioner Gwynn. Yes, this is the charter requirement that we advise the city council or report to the city council on an annual basis about the status of the controlled housing stock. So we will, with your direction, forward this to the city council.
And do you need an actual vote, or do you just need a consensus?
And just say you'd like us to do that.
I believe I sense a consensus for you to do that. Yes, Commissioner Gonska.
I'm sorry.
I think I see a consensus unless anyone objects
Yes.
that we are giving such direction.
All right, thank you, we'll do that.
Thank you. We have two quick items, very interesting items. We have the mid-year budget report, and we have the consideration of resolutions from this body regarding legislation on AB 1620, AB 1505, 1317, and SB 466. With the body's permission, I'd like to switch the last two. I would like to hear item 12D, the consideration of the legislative measures first, and do the budget report to wrap up. Do you want to do a staff report?
Up to you.
Or do we just want to dive into the items?
You can feel free to dive in. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay. So if folks may not remember, we had our lobbyist, Brian Augusta, come a while back, and he went over some legislation that we were considering, or that he thought it was of interest to the board or in the best interest of our charter, or that we should be on the lookout to oppose or suggest to amend. And we found a few laws we wanted to talk about as a board. Some were in some that I, for one, am proposing that we be in support of, and a couple that I'm proposing we be in opposition to unless amended, or in opposition to completely. And so we're here tonight to discuss a few of those and to see if we as a body, at least by majority consensus, want to resolve to show our support for these bills. The first one is AB 1620. It's brought by our own local assembly member, Rick Zabur. This bill would require landlords statewide to permit permanently disabled tenants who live upstairs to move downstairs, for simplicity's sake. I, for one, have actually been helping Assemblymember Zabur with the language. It's great because he has already checked out much of this with landlord associations who are not opposed in its current form to this bill. And essentially what it would do, it would be the very first change to Costa-Hawkins in 28 years. And it's pretty historic just for that, but it's also a pill that I think is slightly easier for the landlords to swallow, in that they don't see it as a runaway train down the hill. They see it as, well, okay. It would help seniors. It would help disabled veterans and citizens of and residents of all ilk to benefit and age in place, to have their disabilities recognized. And what it would do is it would transfer their exact MAR from one unit to another, which typically under Costa-Hawkins is not allowed or required. So it would go with them. It's been pretty well considered and heartily worked on by a lot of advocates. And I invite discussion on AB 1620 by this body at this time to support this bill, or not.
I'm glad you brought this up, because this wasn't even one that was on the agenda back when Brian was here, because it was one of those where they just had a placeholder, and so then it was created afterwards. And so I'm glad you brought it up, because it seems a no-brainer. And like you said, it seems if they're ever going to do something to Costa-Hawkins, this would be something that I would hope that landlords could understand, that it's the reasoning for it. So, and I applaud you for being helping with the language in this as well, because that's all my comment is.
Great. Commissioner Gonska?
Just a quick question. Is there anything in the language of the draft of this bill, apologies, I haven't read it entirely, but that if there is not a comparable unit on the first floor, is there any sort of provision that would help them to still obviously the rent may change or terms of the lease may change, but that could be a guidelines for allowing that move to happen, with still having, not resetting at market rate, for example?
So the only thing, the only instance in which this would be enacted or would happen in the real world is if in your same unit or in a building on a contiguous property, like you could have more than one structure on the same property, if an accessible unit accessible floor unit becomes open, this is a first right of refusal to the disabled person on an upper floor. They do not have to take it. They do not have to take the first one. They could wait and take one in 5 years, but it's very malleable. I guess I'm not understanding your question exactly.
I think that helps to answer it.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's, if the answer really is if there isn't a directly comparable unit available, then the option wouldn't exist for them to move.
So more specifically, it'd be the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms or smaller. It would not be a larger unit on the bottom floor. A landlord would not be forced to exchange, say, an owner's unit with 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms in the front of the building for a 1-bedroom upstairs.
Does it contemplate anything like amenities if the bedrooms are the same number of bedrooms, if it's more updated or modern?
It does not specifically, and that's not seemingly a problem for either party, because the landlord does not have to make improvements to the vacant unit in order for the person to select to take it. If that unit happens to be more updated, so be it. However, the unit that they're vacating then has the opportunity to be updated as well and rented at a Costa-Hawkins market rate rent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. I would entertain a motion to approve our support and endorsement of AB 1620.
Can you make it a motion to adopt the resolution?
Let's make it a motion to adopt the resolution.
I make the motion to adopt the resolution. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you. That's AB 1620. Moving on to SB 466. All right. This is the Wahab bill. This is a wholesale modification to the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. We brought this one forward for resolution of support because it's in keeping with the mission of our charter to preserve the affordability and the existence of our rent-controlled housing stock. This essentially would not touch vacancy decontrol or control. However, it would enable on a rolling forward basis cities, if they desired to do so and enacted laws to do so locally, to bring more housing stock under rent control. So right now, Costa-Hawkins forbids anything after 1979 from being controlled for us. Now, in some other jurisdictions, it is later. It's 1995, 1999, depending on when they enacted rent control. But there's actually kind of a punishment for cities that have had it longer. We are not allowed to bring any new housing stock built after 79 under rent control under any circumstances, under the current form of Costa-Hawkins. This would alter that to allow anything that is older than 15 years to potentially be brought under rent control by any rent control jurisdiction in the state, or any in the future who enact rent control. It would be up to local citizens to decide when that line on the calendar is drawn. It could be the 15 years, it could be 20 years, it could be, it could be anything that a local municipality decides. So it would seem in keeping, in my opinion, with this board's mission to issue a resolution to support this legislation.
Can I just make one? In the
Yes.
staff report, it says that they eliminated the exemption for single-family homes. I was told that that was recently amended, so the exemption is back in for single-family homes. So if you support this measure, it would just be to adjust the new construction exemption.
Commissioner Gwynn?
That's what I was just going to mention.
Okay.
That
Yeah.
amendment.
So what that's pertaining to for the public's knowledge is there are a lot of corporate landlords now that own gazillions of single-family homes both in California and other states as a result of the economic downturn and foreclosure crisis of 2008. So tenants are in single-family homes and condominiums Costa-Hawkins exempts those structures from rent control. And this was going to address that, but in some sort of an amendment between a few weeks ago and now, it has been reinstated. But the ability to bring apartment buildings under rent control is preserved in Wahab at this time, and still, to my mind, still is an achievement that furthers the mission of our charter. Any discussion of this item? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to support this resolution.
So you'll be voting to adopt the resolution as amended to strike that portion of the resolution that refers to the
Right.
single home exemption.
Thank you for that clarification.
I move that we adopt resolution number 23-002 as amended with the portion to strike as just mentioned.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you.
I can't get myself.
The third of four is AB 1505. This is regarding money that the state already has in the budget, but that for some reason they have not appropriated formally to assist, we think, I think, lower income or demonstrating need landlords who are having trouble paying for the seismic retrofit of their soft story structures around the state of California. We have many good landlords here who have already begun and completed seismic retrofit. These funds would be available going forward, should they be appropriated by the actions of this bill, to further assist low-income landlords to complete that work to keep our residents safe and to preserve our housing stock, which we think is also completely in line with the mission of our charter and this board. So that's why this one is before you. Any discussion of this bill? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to pass this resolution.
I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion that we adopt the resolution in support of 1505.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? All right, AB 1505 is resolved to be supported by this board. And finally, we have AB 1317. This is to unbundle parking from every single residential lease in the state of California. I am, for one, opposed to the unbundling of parking. First of all, it's in violation of most rent control jurisdictions' charters. The MAR is controlled. The maximum allowable rent totals are controlled for a reason. Much like the old eBay class action lawsuit and government regulations surrounding, the item is 10 cents, but the postage is $35 to evade sales taxes, right, paid by the seller. This is much the same thing. So you'd say, oh, well, your rent-controlled rent is $900, but your parking space is suddenly $600. So we do not favor unbundling. And we would like this author of this legislation to hear that opinion. Any discussion of this item? I see Commissioner Gwynn.
Oh, nope, sorry, that's.
Commissioner Ivanov.
Yes, I just had a question for staff on this. In your research in this legislation and drafting this resolution, so I understand that the resolution before us opposes this bill unless it's amended to exempt rent control jurisdictions. Are you aware that, has this concern been raised with the legislature about exempting rent control jurisdictions? Is there any discussion going on to possibly amend it? Do we think it could happen? Did your research shed any light on that?
Well, we've spoken to our lobbyist, Brian Augusta, and we know he's talking to the author's office. So there are discussions, and we haven't had any indication that they would be opposed to that. So we're hopeful that, especially if this resolution and others from Berkeley get to the author, that they'll be open to that.
All right, seeing no other requests for discussion, I will entertain a motion to support this resolution, to oppose this bill, support this resolution.
I would say, so.
To oppose.
I have the wrong number on there, so I would ask a motion to adopt Resolution 23-004, which
Just a
would
correction.
oppose unless amended.
Okay. It's just the resolution number itself, 23-004. The legislation number is correct, AB 1317 by Carrillo. Do we hear a motion?
I'll take a whack at this, or a motion to oppose this.
To support
To
this
support this resolution.
Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. We will sign those and get those sent off. Thank you so much. We are not opposed to taking up any other legislation. Should any member of the board or staff wish to see any other legislation discussed here, we can do that throughout the session. And of course, our constituents and members of the public and stakeholders can reach out to us as well for any other legislation that comes up throughout the year. And the last item is our mid-year budget report for fiscal year 2022-2023. That's item 12C. Could we have a staff report, please?
Yes. All right, so the mid-year budget report's presented to update the board on the agency's financial experience as of the end of 2022. It's an informational item and doesn't require any board action this evening. The written report details the board's financial experience in the first half of the fiscal year and makes projections for year-end revenue and expenditures. In June of 2022, the board adopted a budget that projected $5,807,000 in expenditures and $6,108,000 in revenue, resulting in projected net revenue of $301,000 at the end of the fiscal year. At year-end, at mid-year, revenue collected was about $81,000 less than the total projected for the year. By year-end, we expect to collect $6,093,000 in revenue, which is just $15,377 less than we originally projected. Higher than anticipated registration fee refunds and a slight reduction in registration fees collected are the primary reasons for the projected small reduction in the overall revenue. Some unanticipated expenditures in the first half of the fiscal year resulted in our current projection that total expenditures for the year will increase by $159,000. As the written report details, we anticipate increased expenditures in the salaries and wages category of approximately $230,000 and reductions in the supplies expenses and capital outlay categories of $48,000 and $22,000 respectively. The increase in the permanent employees line is attributable primarily to two one-time events. First, the longtime systems administrator, programmer, analyst who had intended to retire in June of 2022 delayed his retirement until July. That resulted in his salary and retirement-related costs being part of this year's budget instead of last year's. The second item relates to an agreement between the city and all collective bargaining units related to the discontinuation, of a retirement benefit for employees that were hired before July 1 of 2012. The agreement provided that over 6 years, these long-term employees who are still employed by the city would receive payouts of some of the contributions they had made toward the discontinued benefit. In July of 2022, 14 board employees qualified for approximately a $4,000 payout, and that totaled $56,000 for the agency. At the time the budget was prepared, we were not aware that the cost would be charged to the agency. The other major impact on the proposed projected variations in the salary and wages category results from an underestimation of the increase in the factor that is used to calculate retirement costs. Correction of the factor results in about a $92,000 increase in this line item.
Can I ask you a question about that before we move on? Do you mind?
No.
This factor, an underestimation, how do we prevent that from happening the next time? there's a retirement.
We will just cross-check and verify. The information is provided to us from the finance department. It was just really a transposition of a number. It was, which I hate
okay.
to say, because you know how accurate
Yes.
we are about
Yes,
this.
yes, of
But it
course.
was a transposition of a number, and so it was just inaccurate.
Okay.
So
okay.
we're correcting it now. We've caught it, and now we see the
You
problem.
know, when you make one mistake every 10,000 pen strokes.
jumps out.
Yeah.
Right.
Commissioner Gwynn.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that too, that obviously I worked closely with Lyman Nosebleed for many years on the budget. And as far as I know, in all the years she's done the budget, this is probably the first time she's ever done something like this.
That's right. You
And-
can imagine how she felt.
And I
Oh,
guess, and this is, she's been doing the budget for how many years now? 30?
Well, probably not 30, but
Close to
20, yeah.
Yeah.
Lima, if you're out there listening.
Believe it or not,
everyone gets
Lima
one.
is taking a vacation. She is going on vacation tomorrow. Yay for Lima.
Yay, Lima. And always, yay, Lima. The budget is Lima's baby, and we know how diligent and careful she was. I just had to, I felt for the public's edification, just to ask
Yep.
what the factor was. And if we've already taken steps to correct it, it's been corrected.
Right,
All right. Thank you.
So the little bit of good news about retirement is that the city council had approved a 15-year plan to pay down the unfunded pension liability. And this year, they've recently decided to suspend that payment at least through, I think it's 27, 28. Until their financial situation stabilizes a little bit. So that means the $82,000 that we had allocated in this year's budget will not be needed for that expense. So it helps with these other PERS-related expenses. Several of the other cost variations at mid-year are attributable to the passage of Measure RC and ongoing litigation. Measure RC costs included as-needed assistance from a former information analyst to assist with the volume of constituent questions related to the measure, staff overtime to assist the public, test database modifications, and process tenancy registration forms, professional services to prepare our new MAR reports for property owners and to modify the new database for incorporation of the adjusted general adjustment in February, and a December informational mailing that was sent to tenants and owners, including the MAR effective in February, as well as the MAR to which the 2023 general adjustment will be applied.
Can I ask you something about that really fast?
Sure.
Do you anticipate yet another mailing going out that's extraordinary closer to September, or will it be able to be covered in the usual?
We always do a big summer mailing in June. So this year, the MAR reports in June will list the 3% average number or $70 maximum to which the 2023 GA will apply. So yeah, there will be another MAR report mailing. So in addition to the Measure RC related costs, we also, during the first half of the fiscal year, hired an as-needed legal secretary to help with litigation we're working on. And the cost of her services were shared with the city attorney's offices, and the board share was $31,000 that we had not included in the budget.
Why is that not considered part of our legal budget expense?
Because they're personnel expenses.
Okay.
So it's more comparable to a salary being paid.
Yep.
So you did notice that there are savings in the litigation line,
Right.
but they can offset that additional cost because we do not expect to expend the litigation line to the level to which it was allocated.
Thank you.
Okay, so one major unknown right now is election costs. The board budgeted $70,000 to cover the cost of filling 3 board seats last November, but with the addition of the 2 charter amendments, Measures RC and EM, our costs will undoubtedly be higher than the $70,000. I checked in with the city clerk's office, and they have recently received the election costs, but they have not yet allocated them to the various agencies that will be paying them. But I will tell you, we have seen election costs increase significantly in the past several elections. So I am very certain that we will have additional expenditures for election costs as well.
Can you explain for us and for the public a little bit more about what these costs are and who decides what they are, so that when we decide to bring ballot measures, it's better understood what it's costing?
So the county runs the election, and so the county charges all of the jurisdictions across this county that have candidates up for election, all of the candidates, school board, of course, council, our board, any other elected agencies, the college board. It's all the costs related to the elections, the polls being open, the ballot pamphlets being printed and translated, the mailing costs for all of those. There are, a number of itemized costs. And the way the city handles it is they get the costs, and then they say, okay, there were this many seats for the city council, this many seats for the school board, this many seats for the rent board, and they allocate the costs based upon our percentage of appearance on the ballot in Santa Monica. So the county's election costs have just increased significantly in recent years. So we are learning from that, and undoubtedly the next time we have election costs, which will not be in the budget that you will be approving for the coming fiscal year, but the next one, once we know these costs, will increase what we allocate for that.
But this board has only done charter amendments every so often. Certainly not every cycle.
No, this was the first time we did it since 2012. But back in, I think we did 2012, 2010, maybe 2008. So there was a time where we did several, 2 years, every 2 years. But yeah, we had not done them for a while.
And part of Measure RC that did go onto the ballot was reducing the need to even have an election for our seats if the same number of candidates qualify as there are the number of seats. And so the savings that we advertised to the folks and that advocacy groups in our community advertised for supporting Measure RC were based on that savings.
And I was very happy to see that pass, because it's unfortunate for us to have to pay for election costs when we know the outcome of the election at the beginning. And this mirrors what the school boards do in the state education code. So, there was no reason not to do that. And I was happy that you all put that on the ballot and that the the voters of Santa Monica supported that. And so the bottom line here is that currently it appears that by year end, the projected net revenue will be reduced from $301,000 to approximately $127,000. And these funds will be added to the board's reserves.
Will you talk a little bit about our reserves and the current status, what's required and what our usual typical reserve is versus what it's going to be because of this cut in our projection?
And just to add on to that, just any context you can provide about what that approximately $175,000, what impact it may have, if any.
Well, it's going to be, we're projecting that as net revenue that we'll be able to add to the reserve. A couple of, this is kind of a cyclical thing with the board setting the registration fee. Usually it's set at an amount that we know will last us for hopefully 3 to 5 years at that amount. At the beginning, there's usually a little bit extra that can go back into the reserve, but by the end of that time period, we're usually having a bit of a deficit, so we're pulling from the reserve. We are required, or it's good financial practice for us to have within the reserve the 10% of our current operating budget plus sufficient funds to cover all of the leave that has been accrued by the employees but has not been used because they're entitled to that. So we retain within the reserve sufficient funds for those two purposes plus a cushion so that in those years when we have over expenditures, we have something to draw from. We also, I think it was 7 years ago, the city made a major pay down on PERS, another payment towards the unpaid or unfunded liability, and our share of that was a little more than $500,000. So we had a loan from the city to cover that because we had not anticipated that. It was something that the council decided to do mid-year. So they gave us a loan, and so we also have funds in the reserve to pay back that loan. And we're paying it over 10 years at a very reasonable interest rate, and we're in the 7th year, so I think we have about $215,000 left.
I think it is worth noting that even though we don't use any tax dollars for this organization's operations, our employees are city employees and do participate in the pension and benefits programs of the city. So that's why we contribute to the paying down of that obligation. The interesting thing is we've skillfully done it in annual payments of this loan within a typical budget, where we didn't have to magically come up with money that we've never in the history of the agency ever had to come up with before. So just in the registration fee, that actually did cover.
Right. So that's a
Cost of this
non-operating expense. The amounts that I talked about tonight were strictly the operating expense portion of the budget. For the past several years, we also had non-operating expenses that covered both this loan and the development of the replacement database information system. So we have those as non-operating expenses. We're coming to the end of the contract with the database developer. We'll be making the last payments on that by the end of this fiscal year, although we have an ongoing relationship with them to provide professional services to help with the modifications and improvements of the database. And I foresee that we will do that going forward as long as we're working with this database, because this company helped us develop it. They know it very well, and they're providing good service for us. So it's an important piece to make sure that the database is doing what we need.
I have one last question. On the front page, bottom of the summary, it says that processing tenancy registration forms, I don't mean to sound like ignorant, but that's a huge part of what we do is register tenancies. So I was just curious why it was singled out as like a reason, like why was this year's processing any different? That's what the database is supposed to help with, right?
It is helping, but we had a large number of forms filed, and we wanted to get those processed.
Why was it different? Why was it larger
I
than
don't
usual?
know. I think after the MAR reports were sent last summer, we got a huge number of filings. That always is the case because the MAR reports show this is the date of the most recent tenancy, this is the amount that you registered. And when property owners see that, they realize, oh, I forgot to register this unit and that unit. And so we always have a huge influx. But we wanted to get all of those processed so that the MAR reports that went out would have accurate information about that they had registered that tenancy and that we knew what the correct rent was, and then we could say they were or were not eligible for the general adjustment.
Right. Okay. Does any other commissioner have questions or comment about the budget report? All right. Do you need any action from us at the end of this item?
This is just an informational item tonight.
Well, all right. Thank you, honored guests, for attending the meeting and everyone who's watching online. Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, staff, for an amazing annual report and budget report. Thank you to our legal staff and our hearing staff, and to the public for watching. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, nobody wants to go? Someone say so moved.
So moved.
Can we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. We're adjourned.